All right, my people. So I'm going to do a story today. I'm actually going to do a dive on several Greek mythology stories and kind of go through a bunch of them. But today I'm going to focus on Kronos. If there is a Greek mythology story or a character that you want a deep dive done on that you're interested in and you'd like to learn more about, then let me know. You can leave in the comment section or something. I may even do a deep dive on them. But you got to let me know because I'm not a mind reader. So this story is going to be on Kronos, and we're going to go all the way back to the beginning. Gaia, which is the earth, and Uranus, which is the sky. Now, they, of course, whatever, and they have an offspring of many different titans. One of those titans being Kronos. Now, Kronos is a complicated character. He has actually brought about the most, what they call the golden age, the best time that has ever been, but simultaneously was also the most ruthless and cruel monster that ever lived. So, and that's saying something amongst Greek mythology because for him to be one of the worst, he's pretty bad. So Gaia loves her children. She thinks of them fondly. She wants nothing but the best for them. Uranus, on the other hand, not quite so much. He views the Titans as competition. One day they're coming to take my throne. They're going to try to take my power from me, and we ain't having no part of that. So Uranus ends up keeping them at arm's distance, not really getting too close, not really killing them or maiming them either, but I don't really want no part of them. I don't trust them. Now, there were two other offspring which he detested, thought that they were hideous, wanted no part of them. One of those being the Cyclopes. Now, the Cyclopes were basically a cyclops with one burning eye, and the other being the Hecatoncheires. Now, the Hecatoncheires were odd to say the least. They had like 100 heads, 100 hands, probably pretty weird looking characters. I could understand why he would look at them unfavorably. But be that as it may, him looking at them so disdainably that he wanted them thrown into the abyss. He wanted them gone. He said, I don't want them around anymore. So he ends up having Gaia lock them away inside Middle Earth, which is basically inside of her, as weird as that is. So in doing that, causes Gaia a great deal of distress. She is sorrowful, upset. She is mortified. She just is so distraught at the thought of her children being abandoned and cast away. So she ends up coming up with a plan to get rid of Uranus, to try to defeat him. So you had Kronos, of course, but you also had 12 other children and or titans. I'll start with Oceanus. He was the river that surrounded the earth, also was the only titan to have stayed out of conflict and never gotten into a major battle. You had Coeus and Phoebe, which were known for wisdom and prophecy. They had a child, Leto, which actually had given birth or was the mother of Apollo and Artemis. You had Creus, who was actually connected to the stars and actually carried the power of the stars in himself. You had Themis, who was basically stood for like justice and balance and all things of equal standing in the world. You had Mnemosyne, which was like the titan of memory, which actually ended up giving birth to the muses, which were responsible for things like art and creativity and song, all kinds of different cool stuff. You had Theseus, which was the titaness of fresh water, which actually formed all the rivers and lakes and streams and stuff like that, and actually was responsible and gave birth to the nymphs. And finally, last but certainly not least, you have Rhea, which was the sister and wife of Kronos. I don't know. Her sorrow would actually go on to change the fate of both men and gods. That's a whole lot of sadness. And her relationship with Kronos, unfortunately, was one of the most tragic and dysfunctional throughout all Greek mythology. They were a bit toxic. So Gaia ends up coming up with a plan to get rid of Uranus. She can take his cruelty no longer. She's done with it. So she ends up coming up with a plan to forge a sickle, and this sickle is made of adamantium, which is an unbreakable metal that can cut right through celestials and gods and others. So upon coming up with this, her and Kronos have to come up with a plan to pull Uranus into a false sense of security, because fighting Uranus just head on in battle is crazy because he's the sky. Like, good luck. So Kronos and her come up with a plan that Gaia will lure Uranus into her bed chambers, into a false sense of security, in which Uranus will run in and will chop off his... Yeah. So he does, and blood, of course, goes everywhere, and from this blood that hits the ground, 4 new creatures are born. What? And those creatures are the Furies, which are like vengeance spirits, the Gigantes, the Melanes, and the Nymphs of the Ash Tree. Okay, now they take it and throw it into the ocean because apparently that's what you do with those once they've been chopped off, I guess. And it begins to stir the ocean, causing all kind of chaos. Foam flows up from the ocean, and out of this foam, Aphrodite is born, the goddess of love, which is a crazy way to be born, but this is mythology and crazier things have happened. Now, upon him eliminating his father, so to speak, and pushing Uranus out of the way and Kronos taking over, there came what was called the Golden Age of the Earth, which was where peace was prevalent and prosperity flourished. People had more than they needed. Grains would actually not even need harvesting. The honey would drip from the trees. The fish were overflowing in the waters. It was a great time of great peace, and everybody had more than they needed and lived in great standing. It was a good time on the earth. Everybody was having a good time, pretty much. But of course, this didn't last long, as it is Greek mythology, quite frankly, and also because Kronos' power lust would not let him actually take a breath. Now, Kronos was cursed by Uranus when he, did that, and he was told by Uranus that your children will overthrow your throne as well. And he couldn't get this out of his head, and it stayed with him. And despite the age of, peace and the golden age, he just couldn't let this go. So Kronos was actually eaten alive by this and turned into a monster by this prophecy. Now, amongst this dysfunctional tree of family roots, you have his children, which, quite frankly, he wasn't fond of either. You have Hestia, which was the goddess of the hearth. Now, the hearth was like the place leading out of a fireplace where everybody would gather around to stay warm. I don't know why she was the goddess of that. Maybe because it symbolizes where everybody would gather together to stay warm and comforted. I don't know. You'd have to ask them. You also have Hera, which was the goddess of the harvest. You had Hades, which needs no introduction. Pretty much everyone knows who he is, the goddess of the underworld. You have Poseidon, which was the god of the seas and waters and controlled everything there within. And then you had, last but not least, which everyone knows, Zeus, which was the god of sky, thunder, lightning, and so on and so forth, and was the ruler of all the gods in Olympia. Now, the way that he would actually go about trying to stop this prophecy from coming to fulfillment was actually by eating his own children. Yeah. So Rhea ended up giving birth to their first, and he just snatched her right out of her arms and ate her, and continued that with all the children. So this continued on until finally their last child, which was Zeus. Rhea couldn't deal with it any longer. Her significant other had turned into a monster that was eating their children. So she was like, I've had enough of this. She goes to Gaia, which is Kronos' mother, which is also her mother because they're brother and sister. So goes to Gaia and says, I can't deal with this anymore. I need help. And Gaia actually secures for her safe passage to the island of Crete. Now, it's on the island of Crete that she gives birth to what would later become Zeus. But she actually had to go under Mount Ida, and giving birth there and leaving him, the nymphs would take care of him. There was a goat, Amanthea, something like that would feed him and nourish him. And to hide the child, because of course babies cry, the Crete guards would actually clang together their shields, or at least when the child was crying, so that Kronos could not hear the cries of the young Zeus and come and eat him as well. So Rhea has to return home because she knows Kronos will be looking for them. So she actually has a plan, and this is where part 2 of her plan comes to fruition. She's going to take a stone, wrap it in blankets, very tight, making it look like a baby, and swaddling blankets. So she does this, returns home. As soon as she returns home, Kronos sees the blanket and or stone, runs up, grabs it, throws it down in the hatch, and eats the baby. So after doing this, he feels good about himself. The prophecy is pushed off for the time being. He doesn't have to worry. He can put his mind at ease and hold on to his power for longer. What he doesn't realize is he's actually fulfilled the prophecy by doing so. So across the globe, on the other side of the world, Zeus is training, getting stronger as a young man. He finally becomes an adult male, and he feels comfortable stepping out of the shadows because he knows the prophecy and he knows that an heir will overthrow Kronos. And given that he is the only heir left, it has to be him. So this gives him an air of invincibility. He steps out from the shadow and actually goes back to his father's house, but not as his father's son, but rather as just a cupbearer in his father's house, kind of blending in and not quite giving out who he really is just yet, until he can get close enough and devise a plan strong enough in order to overthrow his father and take that role for himself. All right, so finally the time came for Rhea and Zeus's plan to come to fulfillment. So they would overthrow Kronos, and the way that they were going to do that is Rhea was going to come up with a potion, and Zeus was going to slip it into the wine of Kronos during this big festival. She comes up with the potion. Zeus pours it into his wine during this festival because remember, Zeus was the cupbearer in the home, so he had access to that. Kronos drinks the wine down, his stomach begins to ache in horrible pain, and one by one he begins to expel each one of these gods and or his children and or Zeus's brother and sister, his sibling. The first of which that he expelled was Hestia, which of course is the god of home and domestic life. Demeter, which was the god of agriculture and harvest. Hera, which was the queen of the gods, which was the god of marriage and family. Hades, of course, needs no introduction. He's the god of the underworld. And last but not least, Poseidon, which was the god of the seas. Each one of these were freed, but this didn't actually stop Kronos immediately. What actually happened was this began a long war, which would take place over the course of time, and this would begin to be the beginning of the prophecy being fulfilled in the overthrowment of the Titans. But make no mistake about it, Kronos was not going to go softly into the night. His power lust is too great, and he's not just going to walk away quietly, even though he knows this prophecy is going to take place. But he's still in his mind thinks, maybe some way I can push this off and keep it from becoming fulfilled. Surely in the back of his mind he has to know that's not going to happen, but he's going to at least attempt what he might deem the impossible and stop this prophecy from becoming fulfilled. So he goes to each one of his brother and sisters, which are still loyal to him and still has some tribute to him. And keep in mind, they also don't want their reign of power to end because they don't want to be replaced and be outcast. And they're afraid when the gods came in and took over that they would push all the old out, which usually happens in every kingdom. I mean, that's kind of how it goes. So they're well aware of this. So one by one, he goes to his brothers and sisters and he tries to call them to him to be able to stop this from becoming fulfilled. He first went to Atlas, which of course was the Titan who held up the heavens and everything above. He went to Iapetus, which was the father of Prometheus and Epimetheus. He went to Hyperion, which was the Titan of heavenly light, and he went to Koius, which was the Titan of knowledge and wisdom and thought. So understand, these Titans are incredibly powerful, with or without Kronos. So they, even though the gods somewhat outnumber the Titans, the gods are no force to reckon with the Titans alone. So Zeus also comes up with a plan to free the Cyclopes and the Hecatoncheires. Now, the Cyclopes are so grateful to be released that when they're released from this abyss that they have been thrown in, this dungeon, so to speak, inside Gaia, that they ended up actually forging mighty, powerful weapons for the gods in order to help them with their fight against the Titans, because they felt besmirched by the Titans, especially Kronos. So they end up making, of course, the lightning bolt for Zeus. They end up making the trident for Poseidon and the helm of invisibility for Hades. The Hecatoncheires also agreed to fight in this war. Now, the Hecatoncheires are huge, massive creatures that have immense power and are a force to be reckoned with in themselves, and they have 100 hands. They agree to also fight in this war alongside of them. All these things combined end up making one considerable problem for the Titans to try to fight against. Now, the Titanomachy War lasted for 10 years. Now, the sheer immense clash of the gods and Titans was so much so that it shook the mountains and split the seas. The Titans, they fought by throwing boulders and fire, while the gods rather fought with thunder and steel and flame. Now, understand that this battle was so immense and so earth-shattering that it ripped the skies, and lightning showed through, and the ground was trembling and torn apart, and the oceans were boiling, and men were still very young in their age, and they were horrified and mortified by this as they watched the very elements that once brought them life, their creators, shred all of this apart. So you can only imagine how terrifying it would be. At first, the battle was very even, with the forces of the Titans being vast, and their powers being drawn from the primordial forces of the universe, with the gods using these great and powerful weapons forged for them by the Cyclopes, Zeus with his mighty thunderbolt splitting the heavens, Poseidon with his great trident overflowing and storming the ocean, Hades with his helm of invisibility cloaking him so he can move through the shadows unseen, combined with the furiousness of the Hecatoncheires, ferociously throwing mighty boulders at the defensive line of the Titans, eventually broke down those defensive lines until eventually the Titans themselves were defeated. Now, the Titans were one by one thrown into the deepest and darkest depths of the underworld, Tartarus, until eventually Kronos himself would be thrown there as well. Now, the irony of this situation is the very place that was once used to imprison and house the Cyclopes and the Hecatoncheires, the kin of the Titans, would now become the forever imprisoned home of the Titans themselves, guarded by none other than the Hecatoncheires. Now, this would fulfill the prophecy and bring to fruition all those things that Uranus had said so many years ago about Kronos, that would bring Kronos so much anguish and turmoil and misery inside his own mind that he would do something as malicious as eating one of his own children. Now, Kronos would be locked into the deepest, darkest abyss in the underworld and or Tartarus, enchained forever, never to be seen again. But depending on which rendition you choose to believe, because there are Roman retellings of this, because they tie Kronos very close to Saturn, where they say that he did not get locked in the deep darkest abyss and or Tartarus, that he actually went on to have another kingdom and he reigned over it again with a golden age, and everything was land of milk and honey and was wonderful and great. Now, I choose to believe the first rather than the latter, because I'm a justice kind of guy, and he ate his own kids and was a massive, massive douche. You can believe how you want to. I'm not here to judge. If you like the story, if you enjoyed it, you can always like and comment a character that you would like to see. Now, I'm just doing Greek for right now. I'll do Norse and other things and history and all kind of stuff later, but for right now, I'm just doing Greek mythology. But if you have a character that you want to see, let me know, and I'd be more than happy to do it. All right, as always, I love you guys. Stay woke, my friends.